The last quarter of the 19th century is often called the Age of Invention because so many technological advances were made. These advances, in turn, generated greater opportunities for mass production, which then caused the economy to grow at a tremendous rate. Not surprisingly, the people known as the captains of industry, to their fans, who owned and controlled the new manufacturing enterprises, became extremely rich and powerful during this period. Industrialization is defined as the process of which a society or country transforms itself from a primarily agricultural society into one based on the manufacturing of goods and services. It is a period of social and economic growth. The Gilded Age, which spanned the final 3 decades of the 19th century, was one of the most dynamic, contentious, and volatile periods in American history. The term for the Gilded Age was coined by author Mark Twain, where he referred to the age as an era of serious social problems masked by a thin golden facade. Rapid economic growth and industrial growth occurred in the North and the West in America. American wages were much higher than in Europe, which attracted millions of immigrants during this time period. The increase of industrialization meant, despite the increasing labor force, real wages in the United States grew exponentially during this time period. Railroads were the major industry, but the factory system, mining, and finance increased in importance. The most common forms of business consolidation at the end of the 19th century were horizontal and vertical integration. One is legal, one is not. Both were practiced by captains of industry during the Gilded Age. For all intents and purposes, horizontal integration created monopolies within a particular industry, the best known example being Standard Oil, created by John D. Rockefeller. In horizontal integration, several smaller companies within the same industry are combined to form one larger company, either by being bought out legally or by being destroyed through ruthless business practices such as cutthroat competition or pooling agreements. Another response to public pressure for reform came from industrialists themselves. Steel mogul Andrew Carnegie promoted a philosophy based on the work of Charles Darwin. Using Darwin's theory of evolution as an analogy, Carnegie argued that in business, as in nature, unrestricted competition allowed only for the fittest to survive. This theory is also called social Darwinism. Aside from the fact that Carnegie's analogy to Darwin's theory was at best dubious, it also lacked consistency. While Carnegie argued against government regulation, he supported all types of government assistance to business. Carnegie further argued that the concentration of wealth among a few was the natural and most effective and efficient result of capitalism. Carnegie also asserted that great wealth brought with it social responsibility. Dubbing his belief the gospel of wealth, he advocated philanthropy as by building libraries and museums or funding medical research, but not charity. Some of his peers were as generous, others were not. Manufacturers cut costs and maximized profits in every way they could imagine. They reduced labor costs by hiring women and children. In cities where most factories were located, manufacturers hired the many newly arrived immigrants who were anxious for work. As factories sprung up and immigrants came more and more into the cities became more dirty and generally less healthy environments. Advances in mass transportation, such as the expansion of railroad lines, steel cars, and the construction of subways allowed the middle class to live in nicer neighborhoods, including bedroom communities in the suburbs, and commute to work. These advances were helped by men including George Stephenson and Cornelius Vanderbilt. Because manufacturers paid as little as possible, the cities in which their employees lived suffered many of the problems associated with poverty, such as crime, disease, and the lack of livable housing for a rapidly expanding population. As mentioned before, factories were dangerous, and many families had at least one member who had been disabled at work. Insurance and workmen's compensation did not exist then either. The poverty level in cities also rose because of those who could afford it moved away from the city center. As factories sprung up, cities became more dirty and generally less healthy living environments. Prejudice against the new arrivals was widespread, and many immigrants settled in ethnic neighborhoods, usually in tenements. Worse off still were Black and Latino migrants. Many employers refused them any but the worst jobs.